Today, I'm going to be doing something different, but kind of the same. I'll be reviewing the CampSnap screen-free digital camera. This thing was originally designed for children, costs only $65, and everyone I talk to tells me that it takes absolutely terrible photos. So, as somebody who is a professional photographer and owns thousands of dollars worth of camera gear, why on earth would I purchase one of these? Well, I've got a specific problem that I've been trying to solve, and I think this just might be the solution. If you're only interested in the technical review, you can go ahead and use the chapters at the bottom to skip ahead, but I'm going to go ahead and take a minute to tell you about this problem I've been experiencing in my life. So, in today's crazy world, I often find myself, longing for simpler times when I was able to cut the cord and leave my technology behind a little more. I'm tired of being dragged down by my smartphone and overly complicated cameras in my day-to-day life. I tend to be drawn to minimalism, simplicity, and I really enjoy a more authentic experience where I get to live in the moment instead of being distracted by the never-ending flow of dopamine spikes that comes from modern technology. Simultaneously, I am a photographer, and therefore I enjoy taking photos. I want to capture my everyday life to have memories, to reminisce upon and share with my children one day. The issue is that when I use a real camera, I find that I have too many controls and options, and my photographer brain kicks on. I get pulled out of the moment and focus more on the photography than the moment that I'm trying to live in. I've tried several things to address this issue, and to date, none have been very effective. As my wife pointed out, the most obvious solution to this problem would be to just use my iPhone and maybe throw it on airplane mode, right? It lives in my pocket, it takes great photos. The problem I find with using my phone to capture my daily life is that the photos get lost among thousands of other things, screenshots and work photos and yada yada. And also I end up inevitably, even if it's on airplane mode, I end up falling to the temptation and checking Facebook or Snapchat or social media. In order to really disconnect, I want to leave my phone behind in the car and go for a hike, but I still want to be able to take photos, right? So another option here would be to use one of my good cameras, like an X-T3 or an X-H2. Obviously, they take great quality photos, but I end up getting overwhelmed with, which settings to choose and where do I want to focus and what's my depth of field, and those options pull me out of the moment and distract me from enjoying the moment with the people I'm, trying to live through the moment with. I also find myself expending a lot of energy worrying about making sure that my expensive camera gear doesn't get lost or stolen, and I'm not okay with that either. So lately I've tried a handful of compact cameras, most recently the incredibly popular Fuji X100VI. And despite its impressive capabilities, I've struggled to switch off my photographer brain the same way while using that. I'm still trying to pick focus points, manual settings, film sims, and I find myself immersed more in the photography than living in the present, which to me is a problem. Ultimately, I love the design of the X100VI, but I ended up selling it because it just didn't really give me anything distinct that my X-T3 doesn't do. Since I sold the X100VI, I've been using my phone and considering the next step. I've been adding the XE1 to my cart repeatedly, taking it out, not biting. Same with the X70 or the XE4. Ultimately, I just think a camera that has all the manual settings is going to continue to pull me out of the moment, unfortunately. So when I started seeing ads for the CampSnap camera on social media, it kind of looked interesting, right? It's a modern digital version of an old school disposable camera. At $65, I was pretty sure it was too cheap to be any good, but I decided to take a gamble, order one with my own money. Worst case scenario, I'd do a review of it, tell you guys about it, and then pass it along to one of my nephews to beat the crap out of the playground. Best case scenario, I get to disconnect, capture memories, and kind of live life like I did when I was younger and life was simpler without being connected to technology so much, living more in the moment. As far as build quality goes, the camera definitely feels like you'd expect for a $65 camera. It's constructed of pretty thin-feeling plastic, and it weighs virtually nothing in your hand. Despite this, I don't think it's going to fall apart. It does feel pretty solid when you squeeze it. It's not super flexible or cheap feeling, but it's definitely not anything solid like a real camera. I've dropped this a few times, tossed it out of my cup holder, my backpack, and it's held up well so far. The front of the camera is covered by an obviously fake leatherette that has a more premium feel than you might expect for the price. The lens that you see on the front is almost entirely cosmetic, with only the tiny dot in the middle actually being part of the optics. It appears to be a cell phone camera from at least 5 years back, and is definitely nothing special. Finishing out the front, you have the optical viewfinder and a flash, which is just a simple LED light that comes on while the photo is taken. Moving to the back of the camera, you immediately notice that there's no screen with which to review images. What you do have though is a flash control switch with options for on, off, and auto. You'll also find a small indentation for your thumb to grip and a frame counter that tells you how many photos you've taken so far. You'll also find the backside of the optical viewfinder, which is pretty much the same as you'd find in any disposable film camera, which is to say that it's just like looking through a window. It isn't great, but it gets the job done. Rounding out the back of the camera, there's also a speaker in the bottom left side where the shutter sound comes from, as well as the beeps to indicate the camera being on or off. You'll get 2 beeps when the camera turns on and 1 when it turns off. At the top of the camera, you'll find only one button, which is the shutter button, and doubles as the power button. You hold it down for about 2 seconds to turn the camera on, press it a single time to take a photo, and hold it down again to shut the camera off. You know the camera is on when the shutter sound and frame counter are illuminated. When taking a photo, there's a pretty long delay between pressing the shutter button and the photo actually being taken, which can be annoying. This used to be common back in the day, but modern cameras have virtually eliminated it. It's definitely not an instant thing like you're used to with your phone or a modern camera, which is annoying. But I did get used to it pretty quickly, and now I'm kind of in the habit of just pressing the button and then holding still until the shutter sound is emitted. Moving to the bottom of the camera, you'll find a USB-C port covered with a rubber flap to keep dust and moisture out, as well as a micro SD card slot that actually requires a small Phillips head screwdriver to access and remove. The USB port is used only for firmware updates, changing film simulations between regular, black and white, and vintage, and charging the camera. I do believe you can actually pull photos off through a USB cable, but I haven't tried that as I've just been pulling the SD card. The camera does include a no-name 4GB SD card that has worked just fine in my experience. The files in this camera are tiny, and so 4GB should be more than enough storage. Finally, the sides of the camera are completely smooth and contain nothing, not even strap lugs or a lanyard attachment point or anything like that, which I think is a pretty big oversight. There's really no way to put a strap on this or anything to that effect. You'd almost have to glue something on, and I don't really trust that. Specifications are not meant to be a selling point to this camera, so CamSnap doesn't really advertise very many of them as far as I can tell. According to Lightroom, the lens is 7.45 millimeters with a fixed aperture of f3.2. I've seen ISO ranging from 100-800, and shutter speed appears to be programmed not to drop below 1/35th of a second. The files that come from the sensor are 3264 by 2448, or 8 megapixels. The lens is fixed focus and appears to be sharp from infinity down to a few feet away. Macro photography definitely is not an option with this camera because anything closer than about 2.5 feet is completely out of focus. So far, everything about this camera is pretty much what you would expect, right? Well, yeah, basically it's a cheap disposable film camera with some digital guts slapped inside of it, and for the right use case, that's pretty cool. But only if the photos are acceptable. So, are they? I'll throw a bunch of images up on the screen as we go over this and let you be the judge while I give you my thoughts. But let's start with outlining my expectations coming into this. I honestly thought that I could probably get better photos today from a potato than from this camera. So I'm not holding it to a high standard, but let's see what it does. So if we look at these photos from the perspective of a photographer or anyone who's really used to modern photos, they're pretty terrible if I'm being honest. Even at ISO 100, the images are filled with heavy noise, a lot of grain, and while they technically may be 8 megapixels, the poor resolving power of the lens and the noisy images make it feel like a lot less than that. Highlights and shadows are easily and frequently blown out, and good luck recovering them in post because the dynamic range on this camera is horrendous. In short, literally any phone or camera produced in the last 5 years will produce cleaner and more technically sound images than this camera. So basically it sucks, right? We should just go ahead and toss it. Well, yeah, maybe. If image quality is important to you, then this is not for you. But maybe not, because somehow I'm actually finding myself to be enjoying the photos that come from this thing. You know, there are a ton of modern cameras that are striving to produce nostalgic, vintage-looking film files, and this thing does just that. But, you know, not like the high-quality Ansel Adams-style film photos that some people want, but the kind that came from a disposable camera when you were a kid. The photos this camera takes, they take me straight back to my childhood in the early 2000s when I was a middle schooler, documenting my life with disposable film cameras every day. So while this camera doesn't produce images that are even close to acceptable by today's standards, it does what it sets out to do. It captures memories with a focus on letting you remain immersed in the moment instead of focusing on the photography. Like a disposable film camera though, you've got to be comfortable with the fact that a lot of images are just not going to turn out right. Probably half my images are blown out, too dark, too blurry, just not going to work. My wife and I have spent a couple of weeks now playing with this camera around the house, and the other day we even took it on a day trip to our favorite waterfall to go for a hike with our dog and used it to capture the entire trip. The photos you've been seeing are mostly from that day trip, and honestly I think they do a decent job of capturing how the day went for us. My wife actually enjoyed that I wasn't nerding out on camera settings and was just taking quick snapshots, and it was kind of refreshing to be able to just hand the camera off to her without having to take the time to switch settings over to automatic mode so she could use my, my good X-T3 or X-H2 because she's not a photographer. Overall, I'm going to keep this around for days when we go out on dates and want to leave our phones behind. It certainly isn't going to replace anything in my camera bag, but it was never meant to. Overall, I think it's pretty fun to play with for 65 bucks. I'd probably buy it again. Hey guys, Future Destin here. Just wanted to compare a photo from the Camp Snap here to a photo from my iPhone, which is going to pop up on the screen now. It's an iPhone 13 Pro. Both are straight out of camera. You can go ahead and pause on them, compare the image quality between them, and let's get back to the video. To the folks at Camp Snap, if you happen to be watching this, first, thank you for making a camera that's fun to use and different from what's on the market while remaining at an accessible price point. That's appreciated. Moving forward though, I would love to see a slightly higher end model that has a price point, maybe $150 to $200 or a little more, not too much, that comes with a slightly better sensor lens, maybe something out of a more modern smartphone, and has some strap lugs or lanyard mount, as well as a physical switch to change between the different digital film styles. I think a camera like that could be very popular, and just a small improvement in image quality could make this a lot more realistic for a lot of people. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Please like, comment, and subscribe to help me grow this channel. Most of my videos are about photography and the adventures it takes me on. This is a little different. I don't generally review, toy cameras, but I had fun doing this, and so maybe I'll do some more of it. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.